good relationship is real. It lowers blood pressure, cortisol, and the stress hormone and cholesterol. It sustains memory, mood, mental agility. When you hug somebody, it drives up the oxytocin system and gives you a sense of calm and attachment. As you laugh with somebody, you're driving up the dopamine system to give you energy, optimism, focus, and motivation. It boosts the immune system. It increases the pain threshold by 10%. When you play with somebody, it increases your emotional processing. It helps with decision making and planning, and it certainly helps with attention. It's good for you. In fact, isolated people have more memory loss, more depression, more disease. They die sooner. And in fact, it's just as bad for you as smoking, no exercise, gaining weight, and high blood pressure. And in fact, the most astonishing thing to me is that if you are in a good relationship, it can make you live 7 to 10 years longer. So it's worth it, and it's a wonderful time in a weekend when people are really seeking to understand more intimacy, to be able to give you a talk really about perhaps the most powerful form of intimacy, which is love. Certainly love for your friends, as was said, for your family, for your children, for your animals, for your ideas, etc. But perhaps from a Darwinian perspective, the love of your partner is the most profound of all of the forms of intimacy. And that's what I study. I study love. I put people in brain scanners. I and my colleagues have now put over 100 people who were madly in love into a brain scanner. The first were 17 people who were happily in love. They'd just fallen in love. The second were a group of 15 people who had just been rejected in love, dumped. And another was a group of 17 people who were in love long term. They kept on coming into the lab and saying, we're still in love. They were married an average of 21 years. And indeed, they were not only just loving their partner, but in love with their partner. Americans don't believe, most people in the world don't believe that you can remain in love with somebody long term. And indeed, we've been able to prove that you can. But you got to pick the right partner. And so tonight, I want to talk about what love is, what the brain says about happiness. Psychologists will say all kinds of things about what makes a happy relationship. They're all perfectly fine. I want to talk about what the brain says about happiness in a long partnership, and several other things. So, to begin, around the world, people love. They sing for love. They dance for love. They have poems, stories, operas, sitcoms, symphonies, ballets, myths, legends, art, holidays for love. We are literally saturated with this very powerful brain system of romantic love. People pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, and they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems the human animal has ever evolved. So I began to study it. And in fact, it can happen at any age. I'm not studying the sex system, it's romantic love. The youngest person I ever found who was madly in love was 2.5. His mother told me that every single time a particular little girl would come over to his house, he'd sit right next to her and just stroke her hair. And after she left, he'd be depressed for about an hour and a half. I certainly know people in my age group in the 70s who are still madly in love. It's a brain system that can occur at any age. There's no gender difference. In fact, men fall in love faster than women do. They fall in love more often than women do. And men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. I've been trying to tell the women's magazines that for 40 years. They're determined to think that women love more than men. It couldn't be farther from the truth. Gays and straights, it's exactly the same brain system. I'm not talking about who you love. I'm talking about how you feel when you love. And all of our data, and in fact, other people in Britain have put gay people, men and women, into the brain scanner and found exactly the same activity that we have in the United States. So it's a basic brain system. Anthropologists have looked in over 200 societies and they found it everywhere. And so I began to think, this is a universal. And if I look into the brain, maybe I can find out where it comes from. These are some of the traits of romantic love. The first thing that happens when you fall in love is a person takes on special meaning. As George Bernard Shaw once said, he said, love consists of overestimating the differences between one woman and another. And indeed, that's what we do. All of a sudden, that person is very special. You focus on them. In fact, before I put people in the brain scanner, I would ask them what they didn't. I asked a lot of questions, but one of them was, what do you not like about him or her? And they can say what they don't like about him or her, but then they sweep that aside and just focus on what they do like. Intense energy, you can walk all night and talk till dawn. Euphoria when things are going well. Horrible despair when they call you by the wrong name or don't show up or something else. Real bodily reactions, dry mouth, shaking knees, stuttering, etc. Real emotional and physical dependence. Separation anxiety, they don't want to be apart. Frustration attraction is a term that I made up. I do know the brain circuitry of it. When they don't call or don't write, you want them more. The brain just wants it more. Real sexual desire for the person and possessiveness. It's called mate guarding in the animal community. But that's, of course, the very source of a tremendous amount of stalking, clinical depression, murder, and suicide. And certainly the three basic traits of romantic love are craving for emotional union. Yeah, you'd like to sleep with them, but what you really want is for them to call, to write, to ask you out, and to say that they love you. Intrusive thinking, somebody is camping in your head. You can't get them out. You wake up in the morning thinking about them. You go to bed at night thinking about them. When I ask these people, how much they thought about their sweetheart, they say, I never stop thinking about her. I never stop thinking about him. It is an obsession. And last but not least, we're highly motivated. What people will do when they are in love. I once had a man who went to, from New York, I live in New York, to Australia for lunch. And it took him a month to recover, but he wanted to give her a woman an orange for some reason, an orange. And so he went to Australia to give her an orange. That's last but not least, it's involuntary. Stendhal once said, he said, love is like a fever. It comes and goes quite independently of the will. And indeed it does. So looking at all these various characteristics, I'd collected them by reading poetry from around the world. A lot of anthropologists collect potsherds or arrowheads or post holes or whatever. And I think that poetry is a great artifact of the human mind. And so I read poetry from around the world, read a lot of psychology, of course, and found that these are the basic traits of romantic love. So I began to think to myself, everything here in red is linked in the academic literature with the dopamine system in the brain. Bodily reactions are linked with the norepinephrine system. Intrusive thinking is linked with low activity in the serotonin system. This is linked probably with vasopressin, but I didn't know how to measure that. So I came up with a hypothesis that if I looked in the brain, maybe I would find activity in the dopamine system, the norepinephrine system, and low activity in the serotonin system. So I began to put them in the machine. And but first, I came to realize that I think that we've evolved three distinctly different brain systems for love. Sex drive, linked with the testosterone system. Intense romantic love, my hypothesis was that it would be linked with dopamine. And attachment, other scientists have linked that with oxytocin. Sex drive gets you out there looking for anything. You can have sex with somebody you're not in love with. You can have sex with a whole range of partners you're not in love with. Romantic love enables you to focus your mating energy on just one person at a time, and feelings of attachment, that third brain system, enables you to tolerate this person, stick with them, at least long enough to raise a child together as a team. They have many combinations. I don't have time to go into them tonight, but very briefly, when you fall madly in love with somebody, you're driving up the dopamine system. That triggers the testosterone system. A week ago, he was just a nice guy. Now, everything that he does is sexy to you. And it's because you've driven up the dopamine and triggered the testosterone system. But can the reverse be true? Can you have sex with somebody and then fall madly in love with them? Well, a lot of people haven't. But it can happen. And it can happen because any stimulation of the genitals triggers the dopamine system and can make you fall in love with somebody. So as I say very often, casual sex is not casual. Unless you're so drunk you can't remember it, casual sex is not casual. A great deal of things happen in the brain. And of course, with orgasm, there's a real flood of oxytocin and vasopressin linked with feelings of attachment. So these three brain systems operate in many ways. We want them in our partner, we want all of them, but they don't always work together. In fact, you can lie in bed at night and feel a deep sense of attachment to one person and then swing into feelings of wild romantic love for somebody else, and then swing into feelings of the sex drive for somebody that you hardly know, leaving the human animal with three brain systems with a tremendous craving to fall in love, form a pair bond, and rear our children as a team, and also the ability for adultery and divorce. Is technology killing love? We hear about it all the time. Technology can't kill love. This is a brain system like the fear system or the anger system. And in fact, when I began to put people in the brain scan, I always thought it was an emotion or a series of emotions. And it is a series of emotions. And it's a lot of cognitive processes too. But I ended up realizing that it's basically a drive. It comes from it's part of the brainstem, the top of the brainstem and the midbrain, way below the cortex where you do your thinking, way below limbic regions where you get your emotions, in basic reasons linked with drive. And in fact, it lies very close to brain regions that orchestrate thirst and hunger. Thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love enables you to focus on a particular individual and drive your DNA into tomorrow. As a result, my brain scanning partner, Lucy Brown, and I have long regarded as a basic survival mechanism. It evolved millions of years ago so that we could survive as a species. It lies very close to the sex drive, which is orchestrated by the hypothalamus, and also next to a little farther up in the brain region linked with attachment. So these are the three brain systems, and romantic love cannot be killed. If we survive as a species, it's going to be with us 1,000,000 years from now. What is changing is courtship. Courtship has always been changing. 1,000,000 years ago, a young girl met a charming boy at a waterhole. 200 years ago, they swung on the porch before Sunday lunch and waited for him to show up in his buggy. In the 1940s and early 50s, with the automobile, a tremendous change in technology, and suddenly you had a rolling bedroom, for Christ's sakes, and motels. And so now we got this new technology, and everybody's saying, it's a new technology. We're never going to lose. We're going to lose love. It's ridiculous. We are courting differently, emailing, texting, emojis, a way to express ourselves on the internet, sexting. All kinds of new rules and taboos that we could talk about later are emerging, but it's the same old. We're just doing the same old thing in a new way, is finding people. I work with dating site Match.com. I've worked with them for 14 years. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I do think that this is a very useful way to find people. It's amazing how many of my colleagues think that this is ruining love. It can't ruin love. In many ways, it's enabling people to meet more people. As a matter of fact, I've long said to the president of Match and to other people that these aren't dating sites. They're not dating sites. They're introducing sites. The only real algorithm is your own brain. Even your mother doesn't know everything that you're looking for in a partner. The only real algorithm is your own brain. So you've got to get out there and meet people. The problem with this technology is that it's so new that we don't know how to use it. And in fact, there's a sweet spot in the brain. You've probably heard about cognitive overload or the paradox of choice. The brain is extremely well built to sort out between about 5 and 9 choices. After about 9 choices, you're just swiping left or swiping right. You're just not even beginning to pay attention. You're going out every single night with somebody new and finding nobody. All of the dating sites know this. The bottom line is it's just a new technology for doing the same old thing, finding love. But the only person that can really find it is you. Though 2 things that I do know that the modern technology is doing is we're seeing more interracial marriages. That's factually correct. And we're seeing less divorce among people who meet on the internet. There's only one study of that. It comes out of University of Chicago, and I've been thinking, I really wonder, why would meeting somebody on the internet as opposed to meeting them, I suppose, in a bar or at a conference or in a museum, why would it be any different? So I did a study with Match looking at people who met on the internet as opposed to people who dated on the internet as opposed to dating off the internet. And as it turns out, people who date on the internet or introduced on the internet as opposed to off the internet are more likely to have a higher education, more likely to have full-time employment, a higher sexual experience, and more interested in commitment. So I don't think it's the internet that is making it stable. It's the internet that's drawing a certain type of person into the dating pool. But these are the only 2 things that, in fact, modern science has been able to establish about the change in courtship patterns on the internet. Is monogamy natural? Why are we doing this? 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. Only 3% do. We do, beavers do, wild wolves do, little African dik-dik does, and we do. And one of the things that it was a great moment for me, I happened to be traveling in the highlands of New Guinea. He's in his tuxedo. He's all dressed up, just generally wearing ratty old shorts, and I was riding in the back of a really beat up truck. I mean, you could see the road underneath me, my feet. I was sitting in the back with 3 men on an old rusty tin canister. And one of them had 3 wives. And I asked him, I said, how many wives would you like to have? And there was this long pause. And I thought to myself, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 10? Is he going to say 25? And he turned to me and he said, none. And the reason is, humanity is a pair-bonding animal. Having a pile of wives is a toothache. And in fact, the next guy, chimed in and said, can't ever have 2. You can have 1 or you can have 3 or more, because when you got 2, every time you're not at home, they know where you are. We are jealous. We are a jealous animal. We evolved a whole pile of different emotions in order to go along with the basic thing of human pair bonding. So in order to have several wives, or even several husbands, but several wives, you got to have a lot of goats, a lot of cows, a lot of money, a lot of land, something that's going to draw women into overlooking and being willing to share a man's bed. We are a pair bonding animal. I write a great deal about this in my book. I'm not going to go into it tonight. I'm going to the bar after this. If you want to meet me there, I can certainly go into it more detail. But the bottom line is human pair bonding most likely evolved over 4.4 million years ago when we came down out of the trees. And along with the evolution of pair bonding, forming a pair bond to rear our young, we evolved this brain circuitry for romantic love and feelings of deep attachment to a partner. I'm not suggesting, though, that we are necessarily sexually faithful to our partners. The word monogamy is very misunderstood. Among scientists, mono means one and gamy means spouse, one spouse. It does not mean fidelity to that spouse. It's now migrated into the feeling of sexual fidelity. But as a scientist, I studied adultery in 42 cultures and also the biology of it. I'm not going to go into that tonight, but we certainly are a creature who is adulterous. I've never found a culture where people weren't adulterous. Not everybody is adulterous. I've written widely on it. But it's remarkable how many people are. And we also divorce. I've looked at divorce in 80 cultures through the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations from 1947 to 2011. And as it turns out, if you're going to divorce, you tend to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage, not the 7th, the 4th year of marriage. And it began to occur to me, maybe we evolved originally the drive to pair up and stay together at least long enough to raise one child through infancy, about 4 years. And that millions of years ago, it was adaptive, if it wasn't a necessarily good relationship, to have that baby, stay together during the infancy of that child. When the child could move out and join multi-age play groups, so it could be cared for now by a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and other members of the band. They could break up, form a new pair bond with somebody else, and create more genetic variety in their young. So I've certainly had some people come up to me after some sort of speech and say, "Oh, Helen, I'm such a failure." And I say, "Oh, why?" And they say, "Well, I've had 3 husbands." "Oh," I say, "how many children did you have?" I say, "Well, I had 2 children with the first husband, 1 child with the second husband." And from a Darwinian perspective, I'm always a little leery to say this to her, but from a Darwinian perspective, that is an adaptive mechanism. So bottom line is, I think that we've evolved what I call a dual human reproductive strategy. A tremendous drive to fall in love, form a pair bond, and rear at least one child together as a team. A tendency to be adulterous on the side to create more young or to get more resources for the one young that you've got. And also to break up and form a new pair bond with somebody else. Serial pair bonding and clandestine adultery. Leaving us today, I think, with a real dichotomy. A tremendous drive for commitment and a tremendous drive for autonomy. And it's interesting, I'm in a relatively new partnership, and anyway, it's a wonderful guy, and he's really a wonderful guy, and he's a single father, and we had to wait for his son to go off to college, which he finally did, and that first night after his child went off to college, he came to me and he said, we can now spend a lot more time together, but I would like to have 2 or 3 nights to myself every week. Well, that was a blessing for me. I'd been single and I loved going out with my girlfriend, so that worked out fine. But I think that now there's a term for this that has just evolved. It's called LAT, living apart together. Now, it's not for everybody. I'm completely dedicated to this man. I have no interest in going out with anybody else. As I said to him, I'm done. I am so done. But I think that we are now at a wonderful time in human evolution when we can build the kinds of partnerships that we want. And I think that we can actually even have some of that commitment and autonomy, instead of versus, and autonomy in the same partnership. And of course, this has to do with intimacy, trusting the person well enough, understanding their needs, etc. So people ask me about courtship in our age. There was a recent article in the Atlantic that maintained that love is dead and that singles are no longer having sex, which actually astonishes me because I grew up in the 1960s and everybody was horrified that we were having so much sex. Now they seem to be horrified that they're not having sex. It's as if we're in this perpetual need for crisis. But the bottom line is I study this with Match, and I've come up with this concept called slow love. And this is where I think we're going. And unlike almost all the rest of America, I'm extremely optimistic about where we're going because of this thing that I call slow love. It comes from my data with Match.com. I do every single year for the last 9 years a study called Singles in America. We do not poll the Match members. I'll repeat that. We do not poll the Match members. This is a representative sample of singles based on the U.S. Census. And every year I make up about 200 questions. And then generally in August, and then we farm them out to collect data on 5,000 plus people. And all the data comes back about a week before Christmas, destroys Christmas for me. And then by February, we bring it to the press. And every year that I ask, there's some questions that I ask every year. And among the questions that I ask every year, because I'm looking for trends, is have you ever had a one-night stand? Over 50% of Americans have. Not necessarily last year, but at some point in their dating life. Over 50% have had a friends with benefits relationship, and over 50% have lived with somebody long-term before they wed. And Americans seem to think that this is reckless. And I began to think, why would so many people be that stupid? There must be some Darwinian explanation to why people are sleeping around before they wed. And then I read an article that 67% of cohabiting couples in America today are terrified of divorce, terrified of it. And it began to occur to me that this is not reckless, this is caution. What we're really seeing is people in America who want to get to know every single thing about somebody before they tie the knot. Slow love. And in fact, I would even call it fast sex, slow love. What we're really seeing is the extension of the pre-commitment stage of romance. As in my relationship, we started out as just friends. And then a lot of people move slowly into friends with benefits. So they're sleeping with somebody before they've even had a first date. You learn a lot between the sheets. Not only how the person makes love, but if they got a sense of humor, if they're patient, if they can listen, if they're kind. And in fact, I think that we're hopping into bed with people to learn a great deal about them before we invest our time, our energy, and even our money on a date. Then they move into the official first date. It's a big thing in America. Oh my God, people are having all this sex before they have the official first date. But what they don't understand is that the very concept of a date has changed. In my day, they picked me up after dinner and we played miniature golf, or we met friends, or we went parking. These days, they are picked up before dinner, and dinner can cost you $200. So the first date has become really something more meaningful. It's become the beginning of some sort of commitment. And singles don't want to catch feelings until they spend their money and their time until they have some idea of whether this is a worthwhile thing to do. So then they're living together, and finally they're marrying. Marriage used to be the beginning of a partnership. Now it's the finale. We're marrying much later, and it began to occur to me, okay, if we're marrying in our late 20s and early 30s instead of our late teens and early 20s, maybe that long period of pre-commitment is a time where you learn much more about yourself, much more about what you want, and you also learn how to get rid of what you don't want in order to move forward with what you do want. So I did a study of 1,100 married people. My hypothesis was that with this slow love, this long pre-commitment stage, by the time you actually do marry somebody, you know who you got, you know you want who you got, and you think you can keep who you've got. So I did this study of 1,100 married people to see, I asked them a lot of questions, but one of the questions was, would you remarry the person that you're currently married to? And 81% said yes. And love always wins. It will always win. If we survive as a species, it'll be with us a million years from now. By age 49, 86% of Americans will marry. I don't know why we're in this crisis of this, but we are. And as I said, I then looked at happy marriages and found that 81% of people who were married in this study would remarry that same person. It made me begin to think that with this later and later marriage, we are going to move towards more stable partnerships, not less stable, more stable partnerships in the days and even decades to come. So what makes a happy marriage? I said in the beginning, there's all kinds of psychological things that make a happy marriage. As John Gottman would say, don't show contempt. Don't threaten divorce. Listen actively. I'm sure tomorrow a great many other people will add to all the things that make a happy marriage. All good. What I'm trying to do is add what the brain says. I'm not trying to get rid of what psychology says. I'm trying to add what the brain says. And so what we did is we put two groups of people who were in long-term happy marriages. These were people that walked into the thing, into my lab and said, into the lab and said, I'm still in love with her after 21 years, and I'm still crazy about him. As I said to you, Americans don't believe it. And so I said, all right, well, let's put them in the machine. We'll see what happens. And so we did. We did it in England, in China, and also in the United States. And sure enough, we found activity. We found activity in the basically same brain regions associated with intense feelings of romantic love, way at the base of the brain. But we also found activity in 3 brain regions. We had people take a questionnaire on how satisfied you are, how happy you are in your partnership. And we looked at those people who were very happy in their partnership. And we found activity in 3 brain regions. This is what the brain says about a happy relationship. Foremost, express empathy. Second, control your own stress and your own emotions. And last but not least, something called positive illusions. These people had the ability to overlook what they don't like about the person and focus on what they do. And a good example in my life, I went out for 18 years with a guy. God, he was slow. He was so slow. I would walk like that. I was talking to him constantly like that. I could rearrange my living room while he said at one poem, with his eyes shut, no less. He was slow. He was also very smart, very clever, very well educated, but slow. And I began to think to myself, okay, Helen, he's slow. But we'll go to the Metropolitan Museum. He'll look at a painting. And then we will go out to dinner, and he will talk so carefully about that painting. He read me all of Shakespeare. I brought him, he's probably read me 250 books. He read me The Magic Mountain. That's 700 pages, this type of print. That same slowness brought me some of the best experiences of my life. And indeed, this is what positive illusion, there's a brain region linked with what they call negativity bias. It's a huge brain region. It's in the blue here. In the front, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It's a brain region linked with negativity. We remember the negative. We are built to remember the negative. A good example is you go to a party, everybody's really nice, they say all these nice things, and one person says, have you gained a little weight? What do you go home? That's the only thing you remember, is what that person said. We remember the negative. It comes from millions of years of, it's adaptive to remember the negative. It's nice to remember who likes you, but if you forget who doesn't like you, you could die. So we remember the negative. And this particular brain region linked with negativity bias, it's called, reduces activity, giving you this ability of positive illusions. So if you want to keep love alive, this is what the brain would say to you. Foremost, positive illusions, express empathy, control your own emotions and your own stress. And you want to keep all 3 of these brain systems alive. Sex drive, have sex. The more sex you have, it drives up the testosterone system and you want more sex. Do novel things together. Novelty drives up the dopamine system and can push you over the threshold in sustaining love or falling in love. And I don't mean swinging from chandeliers. Just take your bicycle to a dinner instead of the car. Just do anything different. This is one of the reasons that vacations are so romantic. It's so new. It's driving up the dopamine and sustaining feelings of romantic love. And also stay in touch. Learn to sleep in his arms, at least in the beginning. Get rid of the two chairs you watch television in, the big lounge chairs, and sit together on the couch. Walk arm in arm. Kiss and hug. Stay in touch. Any kind of pleasant touch drives up the oxytocin system and can help feelings of deep attachment. Regular kissing does it too. Last but not least, I recently read that affectionate comments not only reduce cortisol, cholesterol, help with blood pressure and boost the immune system in your partner, but also in you. So I generally had 5, say 5 nice things. If you can't cough up 5 of them, cough up 3. Just cough up some nice things to say to the other person for your health as well as their health. But you got to pick the right person. And this is what Match.com came to me 14 years ago. They called 2 days before Christmas. Nothing happens in New York 2 days before Christmas. And wanted to meet me 2 days after Christmas. And I met them in New York, and I didn't even know who they were. Was this a think I didn't with their other act? I couldn't figure out. As it turns out, it was the president on down. And in the middle of the morning, he said to me, Helen, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And I said, I don't know. Nobody knows. We tend to fall in love with somebody from timing is important. Proximity is important. You fall in love with people who are around. I would add that lighting is important. In my case, lighting is good. We tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic and social background, ethnic background, somebody with the same level of intelligence and good looks and education, somebody of the same religious and social values, somebody with the same goals, and your childhood always plays a role. We call it your love map. We build in childhood an unconscious list of what we're looking for in a partner. All of that plays a role. But I began to think that you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background and level of intelligence and level of good looks and education, and you don't fall in love with all of them. Why are you drawn to one rather than another? People will say, we have chemistry, or we don't have chemistry. And I thought to myself, maybe basic biology plays a role. A good 40 to 60% of who you are stems from basic biology. So I decided to begin to look for that. There's a great many traits that come from basic biology. One of them is intimacy. Women tend to get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel till we're face-to-face. We do what's called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. That's intimacy to women. Men tend to get intimacy from side-by-side doing. I think that, by the way, I forgot it, women's intimacy probably comes from millions of years of holding your baby in front of your arms, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. They're always staring at the baby. Men's intimacy, they can watch television on Sunday afternoon, a game, and never say anything to each other and regard it as extremely intimate. In fact, when he looks up, he'll look away. I think that probably comes from millions of years of sitting behind a bush trying to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. You can't be talking to your neighbor when you're trying to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. And I do think that men's and women's intimacy is different. And here, of course, is the problem. So the bottom line is we're not alike. Not only are men and women not alike, no two people are alike. I'm an identical twin, and even she and I are not exactly alike. I have never in my life met two people who I thought were exactly alike. So I decided what I would do is go through all of the biological literature looking for any trait at all linked with any biological system. And then, so I did. And for example, if you give L-Dopa to a Parkinson's patient, it drives up the dopamine system in the brain, and they become more creative. If you take estrogen replacement, it's very good for verbal skills. And so what I did is I looked through 40 years of medical literature for any trait at all linked with any biological system. And there's a lot of systems in the brain, but they aren't linked with personality traits. They either keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating. They're not linked with personality traits. But these 4 brain systems, each one of them is linked with a constellation of personality traits. So I decided I would make a questionnaire to see to what degree you express the traits in each one of these 4 basic brain systems, put that on the Match.com site, and then watch who's naturally drawn to whom. And this is the questionnaire. I had to name these people because I'm dealing with a dating site. So, but these are the 4 broad styles. I'm going to go through them, so I won't do that now. But here's the beginning of the questionnaire. And by the way, I'm going to give you this questionnaire tonight. It generally costs $300. I didn't tell Susan or Scott, anybody, but it's a gift. You only can take it until Sunday night at midnight. Pacific time, because it does cost a lot of money. We don't want to spread around, but it's something that I would like to give to you. But anyway, well, thank you. But anyway, so this is part of the questionnaire. I knew that I find unpredictable situations exhilarating. I figured people who are high dopamine would probably agree with that, largely agree with that. Should behave. Established standards, proper conduct. I figured the very traditional high serotonin type would likely to agree with that. Competitive conversations. I figured testosterone would like that. And I knew from other scientists that people who are high on estrogen often feel moved by things several hours, days, even months later. So by working with these questions over and over, 30,000 people were taking this questionnaire every about 3 weeks. I was able to take out questions that didn't work, put in ones that did, and indeed now something like over 14 million people have taken the questionnaire in 40 countries. And in fact, the president of Match came to me and he said, Helen, will this questionnaire work in other countries? And I said, if it doesn't, I have failed. I'm not studying the American mind. I'm studying the human mind. And indeed, it's the same in China as in Costa Rica. So what you do, you won't get this. You're going to get a more complicated second edition of this. But anyway, this is only one person. It shows that you have certain traits of the dopamine system, certain of the serotonin, estrogen, and testosterone. I got 14 million of these things. And I began to watch who's drawn to whom. So anyway, I'm going to go quickly through this, the various traits of these 4 brain systems. People who are very expressive of the dopamine system, I call them explorers, as I said. Novelty seeking. Sensation seeking is the academic term. Curious, they've got a lot of interests. I would imagine a lot of people in this room are, but we'll find out. If you take the questionnaire, I'll know who you are. They make the most money. They also lose the most money because they're such a risk takers. They're restless. They're exploring. They're not all jumping off mountains. You guys here tonight are exploring, and so am I. Mental exploration. They're optimistic and enthusiastic, self-independent, impulsive. They'll walk into a bar and buy everybody a drink. Spontaneously generous, mentally flexible, open-minded. Tend to be more Democrats. And idea generation. Idea generation is linked with the dopamine system in the brain. On the downside, they can be susceptible to boredom. I'm one of them. I don't get on an airplane without about 40 days of work, just in case I'm on that tarmac for 40 days. These people who look out the window for 4.5 hours, I don't know what they're doing. They tend to be more reckless, unreflective. They look out, not in. As a matter of fact, I give a lot of speeches to couples therapists, and one time I said, that's me. I'm not terribly, I'm more unreflective. And some guy in the back of the room screamed, "You want to talk about it?" I didn't. They can be manic, insincere, opportunistic, and unpredictable. Now, we don't have all of these traits, but these are the traits that are associated with the dopamine system in the brain. Peter Steele is a very good example. Hates uniformity and regulation. Supports loves radical new ideas. Lang Lang, the concert pianist, flair, dazzling, charisma, bravado, extremes, ebullient, etc. And certainly Gloria Steinem. 3 very different people, very different backgrounds, very different contributions to humanity, but this basic same temperament. And they're drawn to people like themselves. People they want to come with their partner to a place like this. They want to leap off the couch at 7:30 and see if they can get into the Met Opera at 8 p.m. They like to explore, either mentally or physically. People who are very expressive of the serotonin system, social norm, conformity. They follow the rules. They like the familiar. They're harm avoidant. They're not scared. They're harm avoidant. I've got a friend in New York, and we go to cross the street, and if the light turns yellow, he steps back 5 spaces. I don't want to be roadkill, but I am likely to dash across. And I step back with him. So they tend to be calm and self-controlled. You take a Prozac or Paxil, or they're driving up the serotonin system, and it does create calm. That's why you take these drugs. They are structured. They like plans and rules and schedules. They're persistent. They're concrete thinking. They're literal and they're detail oriented. And I learned my lesson in Seattle, Washington. I'd written a book on this called Why Him, Why Her. I was going to Washington on a book tour, and a woman was interviewing me. And I could tell she hated me, And of course, the more I felt that, the more flamboyant I got, and she hated me even more. And I didn't get it until the following morning. I was right. I read what she said. I was right. But I got into this cab on the way to the airport, and I said to myself, Helen, why didn't you give her all the details? Why did you give her that big theory? You knew she was a high serotonin type. You could have thrown out the Cronbach's alpha and the eigenanalysis and the ventral tegmental area. Just pour details on her. She would have loved it. And at that moment, I began to realize I don't believe in the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. I believe in the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have done unto themselves, and you can reach them. Let's see, what are some of the other traits? Oh, they're very good with numbers. They make great accountants. More close friends. They respect authority, follow the rules. Religiosity is in the serotonin system. And they're loyal. Loyalty is every time I did the math, it is an absolutely basic mathematical difference. I can't remember quite what the question was, but it was something like, would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? Now, we all want loyal friends, and we all want interesting friends. But these people cannot tolerate unloyal friends. And the other 3 types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. They have to have loyalty. On the downside, they can be closed-minded, controlling, rigid, stubborn, and moralistic. A good example, I think, is Mike Pence. He didn't say, I'm an imaginative conservative, no, or a forward-thinking conservative. Common sense, principles, controlling, Christian, and nationalistic. Very high on the serotonin system. Queen Elizabeth, she had no idea how to handle Diana. I mean, this was a loose cannon on the deck for this woman. And certainly Hu Jintao, the former president of the... And matter of fact, there's a gene in the serotonin system linked with being traditional. That gene is most prevalent in what country in the world? Shout it out. Japan and China. And so I've gotten very interested in migration patterns because of this. They are also drawn to people like themselves. Traditional goes for traditional. And I don't have time with this today. I put these in at the last minute. When I'm doing a 2.5-hour workshop, what I will do is I'll go through all of these and I'll put on one side of the thing all the traits of one person and all the traits of another. And then I say to the audience, what kind of relationship is that going to be? So shout out, what do you think? Just a couple things. Challenge. What else? Who said something in the back? Dynamic. I think it'll be absolutely great as long as they respect each other and need each other's things. I think it'll be very difficult if one wants to take the baby and go up Mount Kilimanjaro and the other says, what the hell are you talking about? I have my boyfriend, we're both very high dopamine, and he's very high testosterone and I'm high estrogen. We'll go into that. But he's higher on serotonin than I am. And recently we were going to the movies. And I said to him, sweetheart, do you have any water in your backpack? And he said, yeah, I got water in my backpack. And I said, well, we can drink it in the movie house. And he said, no, we can't. You can't bring food or drink into a movie house. You have to buy it at the concession stand. Oh, says I. The bottom line is it wasn't his childhood. That's who he is. And as soon as you understand who somebody is, you can do a workaround. Instead of 10 years in a psychiatry office, you do a little workaround, and we bought the water in the concession stand. People are very high on the testosterone system, analytical, logical, good spatial skills, good at what they call rule-bound systems, rule-based systems. Everything from math to engineering to computers, music. Music's very structural. Not to me. I'm not a high testosterone person, but a lot of men can really see this. A lot of high testosterone, they can really see the structure of music. I just swing to the beat, but they see the structure of it. Experimental, exacting, rank-oriented. If you inject testosterone into a dove or a lizard or a monkey, they'll begin to fight for rank. People who are high testosterone are much more sensitive to rank, and they do what's called dominance matching. They attack, and they expect you to attack back. And I had an experience once in New York, which really brought it home to me. I happened to be at a black tie event, and I was standing there with 4 men, and one of them was from the Wall Street Journal. And this guy was taking Helen Fisher to the cleaners. And the first thing I did is I went like this. There's 2 basic postural messages in the whole animal community, looking little and looking big. It's called crouch and loom. Lobsters do it. Wolves put their tails between their legs and slink. All kinds of animals do this, crouch and loom. And I was getting smaller and smaller, and he was taking me out. And all of a sudden, I turned around and I said something to this man that was vicious. I don't remember what it was, but it was also funny. And all of us went like this. It's called the barred tooth display. Chimpanzees do it. You see people on television going like that. And I said, oh, if he thinks like a woman, he will never forgive me. If he thinks like a man, I've matched him in dominance. And there was this long moment. We all stood there, and he finally says, Helen, and he started to laugh. That let the others laugh. And he has respected me to this day. And one of the things that I've said at Match, I've gone through 7 presidents at Match. And and some of them eat rocks for breakfast, some of those presidents. And there was one guy, nobody could get along with him. And I finally said to the second in command, attack him back. Just attack him back. And indeed, she did. And she was the only person that he respected. Now, it's a little hard if it's a boss and all that, but it is something that is central to the testosterone system. They're also emotionally contained. I had a girlfriend tell me some time ago, she said, she said to her husband, she said, sweetheart, you haven't told me that you love me in a month. And he said, I said that last month and nothing's changed. So they're emotionally contained. They do much more emotional flooding also. Decisive, bold. Fairness is in the testosterone system. When I first read that, I said, fairness. But what is fairness? But it's spatial. It's quantitative, as opposed to empathy, which is connecting. And they're very different. And they're direct. These are the ones that scream, get to the point. On the downside, they can be uncompromising, impatient, demanding, mind blindness. I think maybe why the evolution of tears. Women cry tears more than men, so that he notices. Less empathetic. It's interesting how people who are high testosterone, largely men, I've done a study on over 100,000 of it. It's largely men in the 6 countries I looked, as you would expect. And men tend to get more empathetic as they get older. And as actually testosterone levels are going down, and actually they're making more estrogen. And they tend to be aloof. Steve Jobs is a perfect example. And his face is even built by testosterone. You can see the heavy brow ridges here, the zygomatic arch, the cheekbones, and the very square jaw is all built by testosterone. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, they must have meant that. And I think Hillary Clinton is very high testosterone. Wanted to join the Marines, tough-minded, direct, decisive. When asked why she was attracted to Bill, she said, he wasn't afraid of me. Now, I would not have thought of that. I think it's a sign of high testosterone in a woman. And they go for their opposite, negotiators or the high estrogen type. Plato called them philosopher kings. I coined this term web thinking. Estrogen in the womb builds more highways between the 2 hemispheres. It also builds more highways between factories in the back of the brain and the front of the brain. The female brain is better connected. It's not a better brain, it's just a different brain. Giving people who are high estrogen, largely women, a contextual, holistic, long-term view. They tend to be mentally flexible, quite imaginative, able to tolerate ambiguity. All kinds of people skills. It's called executive social skills. They're good at reading faces, postures, tone of voice. Intuitive. Somebody was talking about intuition. We can actually explain. If we talk afterwards, I'll tell you exactly. It's not magic. You actually are using your brain in a certain way. And I'll be happy to go into it with you. And they're nurturing and trusting. That's the most important single thing in all this for me, is that word trusting. Anthropologists have never been able to really explain why we evolved being trusting. And it began to occur to me that people who are trusting, high estrogen, they can see the whole context. They can get into somebody else's head. They can read posture and gesture and tone of voice, and they can imagine what this person is like. And so therefore, no wonder a group of personality traits can evolve together. They're also introspective. Everything has meaning. Everything. Just the way you slice the lemon at dinner means we're not having sex tonight. Everything has meaning. They seek harmony. They want to be agreeable, emotionally expressive, and have what I call diplomatic intelligence. On the downside, they tend to be scattered. They don't think they're scattered, but other people find them scattered. Indecisive, that's me. I'm decisive in my work, but when I'm not at work, where do you want to go for dinner? Well, I don't care. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I don't care. We can do this, we can do that. They tend to be indecisive. They can placate. They want to please. Ruminating. They can think about something over and over and over again. gullible, hypersensitive, because they remember everything. Backstab, not going to hit you in the face, but stab you in the back for sure. And unforgiving. There's a lot of estrogen receptors in the hippocampus, the main factory for memory. They remember what you didn't do 5 years ago. They remember everything. It seems to be often a blight, I think, for both men and women. And they can be effusive. Oprah Winfrey is a good example. As she said, the only time I have made a bad decision is when I didn't follow my instinct. So, Bill Clinton, whole world knows he can't stop talking. Has a real synthesizing. His book was, I think, 963 pages. Real people skills. Very emotionally expressive. A very feminine face, actually. A very soft face. Feels everybody's pain. We've always been wondering when we were going to have our first female president. I think we've had our first female president. And certainly Charles Darwin, who connected every living thing. And these people go for somebody, their opposite. Estrogen goes for testosterone, and testosterone goes for estrogen. So here's another one of my many things. I actually think that these people add a great deal to each other. I'm not convinced they can ever understand each other, but I think they add a host of traits that are very adaptive for raising babies. I think that these brain systems evolved. I think they evolved millions of years ago. For millions of years, we were living in these little hunting and gathering groups. And anthropologists think that we, probably about 25 individuals, travel together. And about 10 or 12 of them were children, and the rest were grown-ups. So they're all going over the hill. And they suddenly see some mushrooms. Well, you can't have all of the high dopamine explorers say, let's try the mushrooms. You got to have some high serotonin traditional builder type saying, it's not in our tradition to try these mushrooms. We got to have some high testosterone people who say, let's have an experiment and feed the mushrooms to the dog. And we got to have some high estrogen people who say, let's sit down and pool our data on about these mushrooms. So I think these broad style, don't forget, we're a combination of all of them, but we express some more than others, are these broad styles of thinking and behaving, I think evolved so that we could put our heads together. And I began to think, okay, Helen, you got to do another experiment. So what I did is I put two groups of people. You can't publish in the big journals unless you do the experiment twice these days. Of people, I put them in the brain scanner. I gave them the questionnaire beforehand, and then I put them in the scanner. And as it turns out, those people who were very high on the dopamine scale of my personality questionnaire showed more activity in dopamine circuits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was able to validate this questionnaire. And I know this is immodest, but it's the only questionnaire in the world that started from brain circuitry to make a questionnaire and then went on to do brain scanning to prove that the questionnaire measured what it says it measures. The Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, insights, all of them started from linguistic studies to make a questionnaire. And you can't go back to linguistic studies to prove that that questionnaire is measuring what it measures. And it is for this reason that a young guy came to me some time ago and he said, Helen, we have to start a company. So we did start a company. The company is called Neurocolor. And we're beginning to use this questionnaire in business. Because as he said to me, he said, Helen, you don't really study love, you study relationships. And there's relationships in business too. So this is what you're going to get. It's going to explain it. So this is part of the new questionnaire. I've begun to break these things down. So for example, these are two, some people can be very curious and high energy, but not very inventive. I have found that there's quite a bit of men who are quite empathetic, but not contemplative, not ruminating. I've found quite a few women who are good systems thinker. They're in business, they're in Wall Street, they're in startups, but they're not tough-minded. So, and I'm beginning to break all this down more and more and more, so that you can eventually get a real map of all of your traits and lay that on top of a map of somebody else's traits and understand where you are similar, where you need to understand that they're different, and work with that. So here is the link. You got to take it before Sunday night at midnight, if you want to take it at all. And I will certainly not share the information. We don't even ask your name. I don't know if they ask your name, but bottom line is we don't care about your name. We're interested in people taking the questionnaire if you want to. So I'm going to end with this. I was in Japan with Match, and Match wanted to start Match Japan. And so they brought me over there for a week to talk to journalists about this personality styles, which I did. And then the very last night, I said to my wonderful little handler, I said, well, what are we doing tonight? And she said, well, we're having a little party. Oh, what we've done is we've invited the first 400 people who've taken the Match Japan questionnaire and joined the site to come to a party. Oh, so I get to this party, and it's in a house. I mean, it's a place like the White House. Huge mannequins with wedding dresses and giant huge ballroom. And what I was supposed to do, everybody had taken the questionnaire, and on their wrists they were wearing a band showing the top of their 4 styles of thinking and behaving. Yellow, sun energy for dopamine, explorers. Royal blue, traditional, conventional for the builders, serotonin. Power tie red for testosterone, and what I call tree hugger green for high estrogen. So everybody was wearing these things. Must have been 500 people in the room. And so I got up, I had to explain with an interpreter what these things were. And then I was told we were going to have a little icebreaker. And what everybody was to do was they were going to go to the 4 corners of this giant ballroom, and they were going to wheel out 4 wedding cakes. The bottom layer, about 2 foot by 2 foot bottom layer of wedding cake. And the 4 different styles of thinking and behaving were going to decorate that wedding cake. I thought, holy Christ, this is the nadir of my I don't know anything about wedding cakes, and I was just praying. So anyway, they did that at great length, and I walked over to the first wedding cake, and this is what I saw. These were the high estrogen negotiators. That cake was smiling at me. Let's be friends. Let's level this play. I mean, it's charming. I'm not sure you want it for your wedding cake, but it was very connecting, communicating, a lovely wedding cake, very high estrogen. Then we get to the high serotonin cake. Formal, much more formal. Nowhere near the emotion. We got 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, 1 kiwi, 1 cherry. Organized, formal, more traditional wedding cake. So then I get to the high testosterone wedding cake. There's no emotion in that cake. 0. But they decorated around the cake. They thought outside the box. So then I go over to the high dopamine explorer wedding cake. And the crowd passes, lets me in, and the first thing I see is a guy pitching fruit at the cake. Another guy sees me coming, and he takes some flowers out of a vase that has nothing to do with the decorations and plunges it into the middle of the cake. And this is what I saw. So I'll just end with this. I don't believe in the golden rule. Do unto others as you want to be treated. Do unto others as they want to be treated, and you will win. Thank you.
time to take some questions. Would you like? Is there somebody who wants to ask you a question? Wow. Yes.
Hi, Helen. My name is Daniel.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, good.
At least I was here. So when we do this survey, are you asking a specific scientific question?
Oh, in the survey?
Yeah.
Well, what I do when I go into a company, now, for example, Merck wanted to know about they're having a hard time selling things to their veterinarians. And so they wanted to know who these people were. And so under those circumstances, we were employed to learn a certain thing about people. And as it was very interesting, veterinarians these days are all young estrogen and serotonin, which you would expect. The estrogen is the connection with the animal, and the serotonin is the calm, detailed, organized. So when we go into a company, yes, we are trying to answer certain questions. What I'm doing with you is just collecting data. I'm just collecting data on people.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm trying to give it to you. You know, I might not do anything with my data. I'm trying to get you to enjoy the experience and learn something about yourself and about your partner too.
Hi, thank you. That was informative, entertaining. So you emphasized in the relationships that work as people who can, I don't remember the terminology you used, but essentially can self-regulate or control their own emotions or something like that. I'm wondering how you view some of the attachment theory or people, I don't know if you know, like Stan Tatkin wrote Wired for Love, that emphasizes more co-regulation, that in romantic relationships versus emphasis on self-regulation.
I think it's both. I mean, I know Stan Tatkin very well. I wrote a blurb for that book, and I see him when he's in New York, and I think that's good psychology. I don't know that much about it, but I don't have enough information to really respond to it in any way. If you could tell me in a nutshell exactly what I know, I wrote the blurb, but it was a long time ago, and I've forgotten what I said, and I've forgotten about the book. And I like the man.
Let's forget Stan Tatkin. I mean, that was just an example. But I'm wondering about the emphasis of self-regulation versus co-regulation in your view, sort of biologically, because where like books like General Theory of Love emphasize the neurobiology, the interpersonal neurobiology, where we co-regulate versus self-regulation. So you haven't emphasized so much that in the part.
I wouldn't say versus. I would say as well as. I mean, I think that we're always regulating in response to what's around us, and it's very important. I mean, we're animals that want to please, who want to get by, who are basically cooperative animals, and I'm just trying to add a tool for understanding who all those people are so that you can co-regulate more effectively. But I've oddly enough been so busy doing what I do that I have not studied in any depth, really. It's hard, I know, a good deal of that psychology. So I don't see any reason why it would make, it certainly makes sense to me. Does it make sense
my
to you?
understanding, though, is it's beyond just psychology, that there are, all these brain interpersonal neurobiology that is based on the biology. But
oh, sure. I think that we're going to, now we can act out of character, but it's tiring. Let's say you send it into a battlefield. One person who's very high testosterone and doesn't have that much empathy, but wants to do a very good job, and somebody who's very high estrogen who has a great deal of empathy. They'll probably do the same job, but the one with the high empathy will probably suffer more. I do think we can act out of character, but it's tiring. And from what I understand, personality is most stable in middle age, that it's not stable among children. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're willing to, a lot of peer pressure, et cetera. And then in old age, we're so busy sort of getting along that we're more flexible in who we are. But we have not done any retest studies yet. In other words, when people take the questionnaire like here, I can't get you to take it a second time 6 months later to see how stable your personality is. But I mean, we certainly are different under certain circumstances. Now, for example, I'm very high on the dopamine and the estrogen scales. When I'm by myself, I'm all dopamine. I'm not trying to please anybody. I'm by myself. And when I'm around people, I will express many more of the traits of the estrogen scale because that's required of the situation. And I do think that we're always regulating, in response to our environment, if that's what you're suggesting.
Thank you.
Monica, you had it.
Yeah, so you just touched on it, but if you could elaborate, since we have all four, it seems like it does change context-wise or situational,
Yes,
which
it does.
ones you're using.
Right. It certainly does, but there's some things that aren't changed. Now, for example, I'm not a tough-minded person. I suppose I can be tough-minded under some circumstances, but by nature, I'm not tough-minded. And could you teach me math? If my mother was taught math and my father was an architect, I'd be better at math. Will I ever be good at math? It's not in me. So I do think that we can be flexible. I do think that, now for example, I was doing a thing with Visa, the credit card company, and a woman took my questionnaire. It was a group of women, about 25 women, and on my questionnaire, she scored very high on the dopamine scale, very high on exploring, risk-taking, novelty-seeking, curiosity, creativity, spontaneity. But her job was the head of accounting, which is bean counting. And I didn't want to embarrass her in front of her colleagues, but I pulled her aside and I said, which are you? Which are you? You scored very high on the risk-taking, novelty-seeking, and your job doesn't do that. And she said, I'm exhausted with work. She does it, and she can do it. But it takes a toll on her that somebody who's probably very, very high serotonin would not take that toll. So we can act out of character.
If she answered the questionnaire, like based on how do I feel when I'm at work versus how do I feel like
yeah, you won't get this, but when I do what you will get, by the way, when you get this, you won't get everything. You'll get the questionnaire, but you won't get a 22-page profile of who you are, how you deal with risk, how for that you really have to pay the $300. But you asked me a question just now that, well, there's 3 ways you can take a questionnaire: with who you really are, with who you want to be, and with who you want others to think you are. And when you're dealing with 14 million of these things, you begin to see the patterns. But in the real questionnaire, you're going to only take it once. But in the real questionnaire, I ask you to take it twice. How are you at work, and how are you outside of work? And then you get 2 scales to see where you are at work and outside of work. And it's remarkable how often people will be quite different at work and outside of work. We're different in different relationships. I'm not the same with my certain girlfriends as I am with other girlfriends. I think that's why we're drawn to certain people, because we can be more relaxed. We can be more of ourselves. We do less jockeying for how to handle this situation. I'm getting to the point now where I can feel it. I can feel it when I'm working to connect with somebody, as opposed to when it slides into a relationship that makes me comfortable. So I don't think I'm studying things that are very basic. Curiosity. Can you make a curious person uncurious? You can beat them every time they ask a question, but are you going to make them uncurious? Somebody who's stubborn, you can make them a little less stubborn. At least they're going to know to keep quiet at certain points, but they'll probably remain stubborn. Can you tell somebody they're no good at math? No, they'll remain good at math. Can you make somebody who's empathetic not empathetic? I would doubt that. These are very basic. As a matter of fact, I didn't show it. What I really am studying, it's so simple. I took these slides out. I was so worried about the time. What I'm really studying is the degree to which you express the traits on the male versus female scale, and the degree to which you express the traits on the stay versus go scale. And every sexually reproducing species has all 4 of these brain systems: testosterone versus estrogen, and dopamine versus serotonin. So all I've really done is found the fundamentals of temperament in the entire animal community. Somebody else? Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for your talk. It was so inspiring. I wanted to return back to some of the stuff that you said in the talk. We start with like choosing the right, like you talked about all this stuff, and then you said, but the thing is you have to choose the right mate. And then I was curious in that, sorry. So and then I'm linking back to the Japanese party that you were talking about, and you said that there were like 50 people in one corner and 50 other in other corner. After you explained all the like estrogen and like all the dopamine stuff, like I still didn't quite understand how that's different. Like, as in one person from one of the corners have all the other like 49 people. How do they choose one instead of like all the other ones? Does that make sense?
There's many things. There's many things. It's certainly not just biology. And one of my slides, I said we tend to be drawn to people when the timing is right. Nothing to do with biology. Proximity has nothing to do with biology. We tend to be drawn to people from the same socioeconomic and ethnic background, same degree of intelligence, good looks, education, the same religious goals, social goals, personal goals, economic goals. Your childhood always plays a role. That has nothing to do with your biology. A good 40 to 60% of who you are comes from your experience. All I'm trying to do is add the second half of the puzzle. What role would biology play as well? Now, for example, I had an extremely unpredictable mother. And if I had written down on my love map what I'm looking for in a partner, I would never write unpredictable. I wouldn't even have dawned on me. But I'm willing to tolerate and have all my life extremely unpredictable people until recently when I finally figured it out. And it's because of my childhood. It has nothing to do with my biology. So there's many aspects of mate choice, many aspects of mate choice. And all those experiences play a role. Just trying to add the second half of the puzzle, which is biology. Yeah, hi.
Hi, I'm Donna. My question has to do with chemistry.
Chemistry?
Chemistry.
Good.
I find in my own world, it's an overwhelming piece in my life. It's critically necessary for me to actually find a bond. And try as I may, it doesn't necessarily proceed unless there's some deeper level of chemistry. So with that, I wanted to ask you how your balance between serotonin and dopamine and testosterone and estrogen play into that picture.
Well, it's basic body chemistry. And I think it draws you to certain people rather than others.
So would it be a high amount of each of those correspondingly, or a lower amount would make a better fit? I'm trying to say high testosterone, high estrogen, lower testosterone, low estrogen, or higher dopamine.
I don't know, and nobody else does. Yeah, nobody else. First person who's ever said it. And, you can't chop off a head, and I won't get any volunteers to see, and it's actually not levels. It's activity of. So you can have an awful lot of testosterone, but if you don't have receptors of the testosterone in the right place, or receptors of the dopamine in the right part, and how much gets caught in the synapse, how much is made, which parts of the brain become active, is very, very complicated. And what I really did is you can't, I did find that people who were very high dopamine on my scale showed more activity in a whole dopamine channel in the brain. And people who scored very high, that was my most important slide to me. I breezed over it. But people who were very high on the serotonin on my personality questionnaire showed much more activity in a tiny little factory that other scientists have linked with social norm conformity. And people who were very high on my testosterone scale showed more activity in brain regions that are built in the womb by fetal testosterone, and also linked with math and spatial acuity. And people who were very high on my scale for the estrogen showed more activity in the mirror neurons linked with empathy. So there is differential activity in different brain regions linked with these 4 styles of thinking and behaving.
So the part 2 on the question is, who connects up with who?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I thought I said that, and I'm happy to say it again because it's very important. Dopamine goes for dopamine. Yeah, people who are very expressive of the dopamine system, risk-taking, novelty-seeking, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic, go for people like themselves, other explorers, other high dopamine. People who are very high on the serotonin scale, Mitt Romney is another good example with Ann Romney, or Mike Pence and his wife. They're traditional, conventional, follow the rules, respect authority, concrete thinkers rather than theoretical. And they go for people like themselves. In those 2 cases, similarity attracts. In the other 2 cases, opposites attract. High testosterone goes for high estrogen, and high estrogen goes for high testosterone. Now, I mean, the only person I got is me. My boyfriend and I are both very high dopamine. He's a writer as I am. He's traveled all over the world the way I have. He's very curious, etc. In that, we're very similar. Similarity has attracted us. He's very high testosterone, and I'm very high estrogen. In that ways, we also are attracted. In those 2 cases, we are following the pattern, but he's higher on the serotonin than I am, which is, in my case, it's great. He makes all the plans. I don't want to make any plans. You know, I mean, he organizes all that stuff. And so that's compatible in my case. I couldn't probably go out with a man who's extremely high serotonin. I used to know a guy who was very high serotonin. That man and I have gone to the same restaurant for the last 15 years. Not one next door, not one down the block, New York City. It's the same one. And I mean, he's a marvelous guy, but long term, I know I wouldn't work. And I think the more you know this, the more you can avoid things that down the road. Now, I mean, for example, if somebody, there's also somebody who's very high dopamine, risk-taking knowledge. They've been around the block a million times. They're 44 years old. They finally meet a school teacher, a primary school teacher who's high serotonin, and they need to settle down. They need that concrete thinking. They need the detail-oriented. They need the traditional. They marry, have 2 children, happy. 5 years later, the high dopamine wants to go see North Korea, and the high serotonin wants to watch television at night. So, somebody else?
Thank you. One more? Should we do one more? Yeah, let's do one more. You have a question? No. Okay. Yeah.
I was curious, is there people that are like maybe 50-50 and then
Yes. 13% of people in my population scored almost equal on 3 scales. But that doesn't mean that they're equal. It means that they have these traits of the testosterone system and these traits of the estrogen system. So they look similar. But can you really be tough-minded and tender-hearted? Both. You can be somewhat more tender-hearted or tough-minded than tender-hearted, but it might look as if they're very similar. So the bottom line is yes. And in fact, when I was reading about leaders, I got to write this book. I don't feel like doing it, but about business. Apparently, one of the things that said that really good leaders, they didn't know they're talking genetically, the way I am, but they said they listed the traits of a really fine leader, and they're quite high on all 4 scales. And they're able to move from one to another according to the situation. Yeah. Well, anyway, nobody gets out of love alive, and the more we can understand it, starting your weekend, I hope you have a good time, and I certainly
Thank you, Helen. Thank you.